Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Chapter 9, where we're going to discuss Jewish calendar contradictions. Now, friends, some of you may have already recognized several conflicting calendar statements that have occurred in a couple of the Jewish documents we've read. But if they haven't jumped out at you yet, I'm going to expose them right now, and we'll find out just what caused these Jewish leaders to make conflicting statements. And friends, I ask you, please pay special attention to what I'm about to share with you, because it reveals a couple of details about the Hillel calendar, which very few saints know. And yes, once again, that includes most festival-observing pastors. Now, the first calendar contradiction involves a Jew's definition of a new moon. In one instance, Jewish writers will say it's the new waxing crescent moon. But in another instance, they'll turn right around and say it's the Molade conjunction moon. Now, let's take a look at two documents that we read earlier as good examples of what I'm sharing with you. And the first document we're going to examine is from the Jewish Encyclopedia in their article entitled Calendar. Quoting, it says, "The first appearance of the new moon determines the beginning of the month." They go on here to define what that is. "At first, a small and faint arc like a sickle can be seen by those endowed with good sight, from spots favorable for such an observation." But in Judaism 101, in their article, The Jewish Calendar, a closer look, it says, quoting, "The keystone of the calendar is the new moon, referred to in Hebrew as the Molade. A new month on the Jewish calendar begins with the Molade, pronounced Molade." Now, actually, friends, Jewish religious leaders, they know full well that the crescent moon is definitely God's biblical new moon. Just listen to what Jewish folklore has to say about Moses and the new crescent moon. This is really get you. Take a look at this, please. Under Chabad's article, Jewish History, Jews commanded the first mitzvah or commandment in 1313 BCE. It says, quoting, "Shortly before sundown on the 29th of Adar, God commanded Moses regarding the mitzvah or commandment of sanctifying the crescent new moon and establishing a lunar calendar. This is the first mitzvah the Jews were given as a nation." Now, Moses had difficulty, it says, envisioning the moon's appearance at the exact moment of its monthly rebirth. After the sun set, God showed Moses the crescent new moon of the new month of Nisan, showing him the precise dimensions of the moon at the moment the new month is to be consecrated. Now, you're never going to find anything about this in the scriptures because it's just Jewish folklore. But they're admitting that what God showed Moses was the new crescent moon. Now, what about that, friends? Even in their religious folklore, the Jews insist that God actually showed Moses the crescent new moon. Why did he do that? So he wouldn't make a mistake about which moon phase God was referring to. Yet these same leaders continue to set their festival calendar by Hillel's dark Molade conjunction moon. So what in the world's going on here? Just what kind of rabbinical double talk is this anyway? But wait a minute, friends. That's not the Jews' only calendar contradiction. The second contradiction involves statements made about the lifespan or the longevity of the Hillel Jewish calendar. You see, one Jewish calendar authority says that the Hillel calendar is a perpetual calendar, and as we all know, perpetual means everlasting or unending or permanent, whereas a different Jewish calendar authority proclaims that the Hillel calendar is a temporary calendar. And that's what we mean by calendar contradictions here. And just to verify what I'm telling you, let's begin by reading from Chabad's article entitled A Jewish Month, which says, quoting, "In the 4th century CE, or AD, the sage Hillel II foresaw the disbandment of the Sanhedrin and understood that we would no longer be able to follow a Sanhedrin-based calendar. So, Hillel and his rabbinical court established the perpetual calendar, which is followed today." Okay, here they're calling it a perpetual calendar. However, the Jewish press says that the Jewish calendar is only binding until a new Sanhedrin is formed. Let's see what they have to say here now, quoting, "According to the Rambam," that's Maimonides, The Beis Din, or the Supreme Court of the Sanhedrin, in the time of Hillel, ruled that Hillel's calendar is binding on all future generations until, and let's focus on that word until for a moment, until the Sanhedrin would be reinstated. So, once again, we encounter another contradictory calendar statement. Now, friends, I can't make this stuff up. I just report what Jewish calendar authorities say about their own Hillel Jewish calendar. So, what's the truth? Is the new moon the waxing crescent or the Molade conjunction moon? And is Hillel's calendar perpetual or not? Well, I'm going to share with you what's going on here with these contradictory statements. And in doing so, I'm going to be exposing some very important information about the Hillel Jewish calendar, which the vast majority of today's saints have never heard from their festival-observing church leaders. And that's the reason it's important for you to pay special attention here, friends, because this is vital information that every festival-keeping Christian needs to know. And here's the problem. As we learned earlier, Hillel was a Nasi, or the last official leader of the Sanhedrin, right? And after he created his new festival calendar, he did what? He all future Molade conjunction-based months in advance. Now let's see what the calendar expert author Spire has to say about this in his work, The Comprehensive Hebrew Calendar, on page 2. Quoting, Hillel II formally sanctified all months in advance and intercalated all future leap years. Now, please don't overlook the importance of what we just read. And why is that? Because as the last Nasi, or leader of the officially recognized Sanhedrin, Jewish religious leaders believe that Hillel's act of sanctifying all future Molade moons is what? Listen here, friends. Listen, please. This is a key piece of information. It's binding upon all Jews until either their alleged human Mashiach or Messiah appears, or a new Sanhedrin court is formed and discharges Hillel's conjunction moon-based calendar and reinstates and returns to the sighting of the new waxing crescent moon as the beginning of their festival months. Do you get it? Do you get it, friends? And the following excerpt summarizes this matter about as clearly as anyone could ask, so let's take a look at these excerpts and see what they have to say. The creation of the permanent calendar by Rabbi Shalita, quoting, initially all these decisions were made by the heads of the Sanhedrin, and indeed when Mashiach or Messiah comes, we will again have this system. This was a system in place for thousands of years, it says, from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, until about 250 years after the destruction of the Second Holy Temple. It goes on to say, at that time, the head of the Sanhedrin, Hillel Hanase, realized that, because of Roman persecution, the Sanhedrin's days were numbered, and it would be necessary to switch to a different system for determining the calendar. Hillel Hanase implemented a temporary Jewish calendar. Get that? A temporary Jewish calendar, which is the one that we currently use, it says. Although many people refer to it as a permanent calendar, it will be in use only until we again have a Sanhedrin, which will in turn be in charge of the calendar. How about that? How about that? Now they're starting to explain why there's some of this double talk here, right? Now let's move to the excerpt entitled The Hillel Second Calendar and Double Torah Portions, which says, quoting, originally the new moons were formally cited by multiple witnesses and officially declared throughout Israel. But after the Second Temple destruction and subsequent dispersion, the diaspora, the dispersion of the Jews, it was impractical to declare the new moon to every Jewish community in the world. And under Constantius II, it was actually outlawed. As a remedy, the Sanhedrin instituted the Hillel Second Calendar in 359 A.D. Implementing the Hillel Second Calendar was the Sanhedrin's last big decision before disbanding. Whenever the Hillel Second Calendar will be decommissioned in the future, to return to citing and declaring the new moon days, it will have to be at the authority of a reconvened Sanhedrin. So until then, this calendar is what unites Jewish people worldwide in celebrating the holidays on the same days and reading the same Torah portion together each week. So friends, here's the deal. Here's the deal about all these contradictions. Although today's Jewish leaders know full well that the new crescent moon is indeed the moon phase God directed ancient Israel to use to begin his months, and that the Hillel calendar is not perpetual, the rabbis believe that Jews are under the authority of Hillel's Jewish calendar and its Moled conjunction new moon until either their long-awaited human Messiah appears or a new Sanhedrin is reorganized and reinstates the crescent new moon as the beginning of their months. And this is why we hear the rabbinic double talk regarding the crescent and Moled new moon, along with the conflicting reports about the permanency of the Hillel Jewish calendar. You see, friends, the Jewish leaders have to play both sides of the fence, don't they? They have to play both sides in an effort not to appear to reject God's clear directions in Exodus 12:2, while not appearing to be irreverent or disobedient to Hillel's position as the last Nasi of the officially recognized Sanhedrin. So, while knowing full well that God's new moon is the waxing crescent, the Jews have opted to follow a long-deceased Jewish rabbi instead of following God's commands. But you know what? That shouldn't surprise us, friends, because addressing the Jewish leaders, Jesus himself said in Matthew 15:3, "But he, Jesus, answered and said unto them," the Jews, "Why do you also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition?" You see, they took the tradition of men over the direction of God. In Mark 7:9, Jesus goes on to say, "Full well you reject the commandment of God that you may keep your own tradition." You get it now, friends? You get it now? "But brethren, as spirit-begotten children of God, we're not under the authority of any 1,600-plus-year-old Jewish religious court. We're only under the authority of our Heavenly Father in Christ Jesus. So why in the world are we following a festival calendar created and designed by an ancient Jewish rabbi which never possessed the Spirit of Christ? That's totally absurd and unsound reasoning. Don't you think so, friends? Now, brethren, time is running out and Christ's return is closer than it was yesterday. And God's end-time assemblies need to do what? They need to repent of this grave calendar error, which most of today's festival-observing churches are following. And we need to return to the biblical moon phase that Jesus created, that Jesus ordained, and Jesus himself followed. Now, please don't go anywhere, friends, because in the very next chapter, we'll be watching the awesome video that I mentioned earlier in this study, which should put an end, once and for all, to the new crescent moon versus Hillel's Moled moon controversy. And I promise that you don't want to miss this, friends. So please stay tuned and don't touch that dial. And here we are, friends, in chapter 10, where we're going to be finally viewing that awesome video I told you about earlier in this presentation. That awesome video where Jewish religious leaders do what? They admit that they're wrong about the Moled moon. Now, this film clip was created by the Temple Institute in Jerusalem and features Rabbi Haim Richman, International Director of the Temple Institute from 1989 through 2020, and also Dr. Roy Hoffman, chemistry professor at the Hebrew University and past head of the Israel New Moon Society. And this video is going to confirm once and for all that God's new moon is indeed the new waxing crescent moon. But I need to take a moment here and set this clip up for you so that everyone will better understand what's taking place. Now, in this video, Rabbi Richman and his associate are on a field trip in Jerusalem where they interview Dr. Hoffman, who is recording information regarding the physical observation of the new waxing crescent moon. Why is he doing this? He's doing this in preparation for the day when either the Jews' alleged warrior-like human Mashiach or Messiah arise, or a new officially recognized Sanhedrin court is formed, decommissions Hillel's festival calendar, and returns to setting the first day of God's months by the sighting of the crescent new moon. And since this field trip was filmed in cold and windy weather, you will hear some wind noise coming through the microphones. So please just ignore this as much as you can. So now, with no further ado, let's get started and see what this short video has to say about the new moon issue. And I believe, friends, most of you will be surprised at what you discover.
It's about 4:45 here in rush hour traffic in Jerusalem. We're on our way to a rendezvous on the Mount of Olives with Professor Roy Hoffman. Professor Hoffman is a chemistry professor at Hebrew University, but he's also the head of an organization called the Israel New Moon Society.
He goes out and cites, records the new moon, and people around the world also record the new moon and send him their records of the new moon. And this is how we determine that there's a new moon, through human witnessing of the new moon, not simply through a calendrical calculation. This is how it was done in the olden days, in the days of the Holy Temple. This is how it was done. We didn't have a set calendar. And so, of course, today we're back in the land, and there is a movement to renew this original and really the way that we were commanded to do it, which is through personal testimony as to the new moon.
Hi. Honored to meet you. Honored to meet you.
Yes, I've met you.
I think so. You look a little familiar. That's right. Years ago.
Hi. Should be directly on the moon. I just have to find the moon a second if I can. I doubt if I can at the moment. 252 degrees, and I'm looking at the edge of the cloud. It's a bit too early to see the moon, mind you. Okay.
What I really want to ask you is, like, what is the significance of this procedure now that we do have the recorded calendar? I know that there is a desire to get back to the way the Torah actually mandates the moon to be sighted, but does this have really a significance for us in our time?
Okay, there are three things that are significant now in the sighting of the moon today. Firstly, it is thought, or almost every authority believes, that we will go back to the method of sighting. And secondly, the Sanhedrin, who appoints a Beit Din, has to know whether or not the moon could be sighted, and when exactly it can be sighted, and how high it is in the sky when it can be sighted. That's why I'm now trying to catch the earliest glimpse of the moon. And thirdly, it's Isuk Limud Torah Lishma. That means that we are learning Torah for its own sake.
So when you establish the details of the height, etc., you're saying you're laying kind of like the groundwork for the information that the Beit Din will need
in order to know whether the witness is telling the truth. If the witness was to come and say, I saw the moon 20 degrees high, they need to know, which is what I'm hoping to find out, whether I can see it that height, well, maybe not quite that high, whether or not it is possible by doing this. And now I've got some 3,000 observations. They could know whether people have been able to do that in the past, or whether it's way outside the possibility. I'm just trying to see where we are now. That's 2 degrees, that's got to go to. I'm looking for the actual angles to try and find the moon. I expect that if that's there, that's got to be about there. See the moon? And as yet I don't see anything.
You said something amazing, if I understand you correctly. You're saying that the calendar that we have today, which is accepted as the established calendar, is actually considered to be only temporary because everyone, all the authorities, the rabbinical authorities agree that at one point we will go back to the sightings.
That is correct. If you read the Rambam Hilchot Kiddush HaKodesh, it says there that this is a halacha l'Moshe b'Sinai, which means it's a law that's very old, not necessarily actually from Moshe, but that when we have a Sanhedrin, we fix the calendar according to the sighting, and when we don't have a Sanhedrin, like it is today, then we fix it according to this calculation, and we do not need the sightings. However, basically all but one authority believes we are going to go back to the sightings, and therefore we must prepare for this. And it's not as simple as you think to see the moon. Sometimes you need practice in order to see it. That's another reason to do this. If next month the Sanhedrin was there and asking for people to turn up, you would need people who practiced for several months beforehand, which is what we can supply.
Amazing. So do you mean to say that when we study in the Mishnah, we study in the sources of our tradition about how witnesses would come forward to say that they sighted the moon, a lot of people have the impression that this was just kind of like a very by-the-by kind of happenstance. They happened to see the moon, so they said, "Oh, we better go and report it." But you're saying that this is like almost like a specialty, like people had to know how to sight it.
Yes, that is correct. If you're talking about a moon that's easy to sight like today, assuming that we get some space in the clouds, then it's a no-brainer. But if you're talking about a very difficult moon that appears for only a few minutes, it could be even only 2 or 3 minutes, sometimes it's 10 minutes, sometimes it's like an hour like today. If it's very briefly visible, it's visible very faintly, and you need to know exactly where to look.
So you founded an organization, the Israel New Moon Society.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about that and what its purpose is?
Okay, well, I set it up in order to get information for an article I'd been asked to write by Rav Nachum Rabinovich, and it went from there. More and more people joined, and more people sent in information. Nowadays it's run by Gadi Eidelheit from Givat Shmuel, and he takes in all the information and sends out the mailings each month. But people all over the country and all over the world go out and look for the moon.
Now, as far as the halacha is concerned of the Torah, is it supposed to be with the naked eye? Are you allowed to use an instrument?
Okay, it's clearly supposed to be with the naked eye, because it says someone who looks into a crystal and sees the moon in a crystal, it's not a valid observation. We have these report forms that we fill out each month describing how we saw the moon, and it basically covers all the questions that would be asked by the Sanhedrin of witnesses. It also covers some other questions for scientific purposes, like the current weather, which is why I have this little weather station here I've put down here.
On your website, it's mentioned that there are some 60 mitzvot, 60 commandments that are contingent upon proper sighting of the moon.
Right.
Could you expand upon that?
Well, basically all the festivals, all the sacrifices, everything in the calendar is based on the moon. So that's about 1/10 of all the mitzvot.
So, in order to proceed from the current situation to the Beit HaMikdash, Holy Temple, and the offerings, etc., the sighting of the new moon, not a calendrical calculation, but the actual sighting of the moon is completely necessary.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. We can't get to there from here without that. We spotted the new moon. We jump in a cab today and speed off to the Sanhedrin, which is not far from where we're standing, and we get in the line, I imagine, of other people ready to testify. What then?
Okay, well, as I said, what would happen is they would invite witnesses one by one until they had two that had given them matching testimony that they could accept. they would then invite the others in quickly to just so they wouldn't be disappointed, and ask them the various questions that are stated in the Mishnah in order to prove that they actually saw the moon correctly. Now, in the last few years, there's been an attempt to set up a Sanhedrin that has not exactly succeeded completely, because according to Maimonides, it has to achieve recognition. However, we have practiced the interrogation of witnesses, and that is also a useful tool in education and preparation for the real thing, in that the first time you go, you don't know really what to expect. They don't know really what to expect. They start asking the questions, and then you start getting confused. By the second, third time you're there, it's like, yes, I saw the moon here, here, here. That's the direction, and that's how you're meant to see it. And then they can come within 5 minutes to the conclusion with an experienced witness who's been a few times before. So it's also a useful thing to do, to set up a Beit Din that reconstructs the testimony, not to do it in actual practice until we have permission to do so, but it's useful in order to train the giving of testimony itself.
Dr. Roy Hoffman, it's been such a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much, Chodesh Tov, and we've learned a great deal and feel that we've been part of a very great mitzvah and the renewal of something very holy in Israel. So first of all, thank you so much for your dedication and for everything that you do for the Jewish people and for the world. And may you be strengthened in this great deed, and may we yet get to see this really used for the renewal of the authentic Jewish calendar.
Okay, thank you very much, and I hope that in speedily nowadays this will come to be as part of the complete redemption.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Whoa! Woohoo! Oh, that's great.
Okay, so what do you think about that, friends? We just saw 11 minutes of confirmation that God's new moon is again indeed the first sighting of the waxing crescent moon, and that Jewish religious leaders are fully aware of this truth and are practicing for the day when they return to sighting of the new crescent moon in order to finally correctly set the first day of God's month. Now, let's take a look at several very important points that these men brought out in this video. And these points are: number one, Rabbi Richmond's associate said that using calendrical calculations instead of the sighting of the new moon is not according to the way they were originally commanded to do it. What does he mean here? He means the way God originally commanded them in the scriptures. How about that? Point number two, this same gentleman also said in the days of the Holy Temple, there was no set calendar. We certainly learned that before, haven't we? And that the festival calendar was set by the observation of the new moon. Get what he says here, friends. This is so amazing. He goes on to say that the sighting of the new moon, not calendrical calculations, not mathematical calculations, is completely necessary to properly perform the functions of the new proposed temple, that new proposed third temple. It's totally necessary to set the dates of the calendar by the observation of the new moon. That's amazing. And what functions are we talking about? Functions like making offerings, setting festival dates, giving animal sacrifices. That's what he's referring to. Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? And in point number three, Professor Hoffman remarked that all but one rabbinical authority agrees that at one point the Jews will go back to the sightings. He also stated that the new crescent moon must be seen by the naked human eye, not with binoculars or telescopes, friends. And that 10%, or approximately 60 Torah commandments, are or were contingent upon the sighting of the new crescent moon. Think about that. And this included, again, events and functions like offerings, festivals, etc. He goes on to say that everything in the calendar is based on the moon. And certainly the moon does play a major part in God's calendar, but it certainly is not the only player. The sun does its portion as well. You have to have them both. And finally, Rabbi Richmond admitted that, quoting him, the Torah actually mandates that the new moon is to be sighted. He also asked Professor Hoffman, is the calendar the Jews have today considered to be temporary? In which Professor Hoffman replied, yes. I just wanted to bring some of these points back to your attention so we will, kind of register them in our thoughts and keep them with us down the road. So friends, this video contains some very important information, doesn't it? Not only did we find some useful historical information regarding the new moon, but now we have a recorded audio-visual account of Jewish religious leaders, actually admitting that using Hillel's Moled conjunction new moon to set God's festival calendar is not according to the way they were commanded to do it. Again, meaning not according to the way God originally commanded them. How much more proof, friends, could a sound-thinking child of God need in order to see that Hillel's Moled new moon is not God's biblical new moon? But for those who are still undecided, I'm going to scroll through a number of references that state that the new crescent moon is indeed the biblical new moon. And it's also the moon phase that was originally used to set God's annual festivals. I just want you to get an idea of how many more testimonials there are that confirm this truth. And for the sake of time, I'm going to scroll through these references fairly quickly, but obviously you can come back later, pause the video, and read them in their entirety. So let's take a look at these references now so you can see how much more information is out there regarding God's new crescent moon. Let's pause here for a moment and see what the Encyclopedia Judaica has to say. Originally, the new moon was not fixed by astronomical calculators, but was solemnly proclaimed after witnesses had testified to the reappearance of the crescent of the moon. How about that? Here, Vine's Expository Dictionary of Biblical Words says, Kodesh, Hodesh. The noun occurs about 283 times in Biblical Hebrew and in all periods. The word refers to the day on which the crescent reappears. And friends, I hope and pray that these additional references have removed any lingering doubts that today's saint should be following a festival calendar that's calculated using God's new crescent moon. And in light of this truth, we find that the first calendar factor needed in order to correctly calculate the dates of God's annual festivals is factor number 1. Always use the sighting of the new waxing crescent moon in order to accurately set the beginning of God's months. But what about the rest of the features of Hillel's festival calendar, friends? Are they in concert with or contrary to the other feature of God's biblical calendar in the sky? Well, let's find out right now as we next look into equinoxes and solstices and see if they have any part in God's calendar and if they're referred to in God's Word. Stay with me. This is going to be very interesting. See you in the next chapter.